Usually, when we crack open an investigative file, there's a certain comfort in the anatomy of a solved crime.
Oh, absolutely. You expect a very linear process.
Right. You have a scene, you have physical evidence, a clear chain of custody, a crime is committed, you find the weapon, match the fingerprints, and the detective just taps the file and says, there's our person.
We like our mysteries to be solvable puzzles.
Yeah, the general expectation is a forensic pipeline that leads straight to a definitive answer.
Exactly. But the moment you step into the world of cold cases, especially ones that have just fermented in the public consciousness for over half a century, that precision instrument is completely shattered.
I mean, it's completely thrown out the window. We're looking at an investigative landscape where physical evidence degrades, witness memories mutate, and the facts just, become indistinguishable from folklore. So true. Well, welcome to the deep dive. I am thrilled to have you here for this exclusive investigative briefing. As an investigative journalist, I've spent my entire career digging into boxes of redacted files, chasing down leads, and trying to separate truth from urban legend.
And we really have a massive file today.
We do. The case we are dusting off today is like my absolute white whale. It is arguably the most infamous, maddening cold case in American history. The 1971 skyjacking by the man the world knows as D.B. Cooper.
The official FBI file designation is NORJAK, which is short for Northwest Hijacking. And just looking at the sheer volume of material generated under that acronym is staggering.
Oh, I bet. I mean, just look at the desk in front of us.
Right. It's a case that has absolutely everything. Audacity, an impossible vanishing act, and just an agonizing trail of clues that lead straight to a dead end.
The juxtaposition of materials I have right here is what makes this so captivating for you and me. On one side, we have original handwritten witness testimonies from 1971 that directly conflict with one another.
Standard for eyewitness accounts, honestly.
Yeah, exactly. And we have those iconic composite sketches of a man wearing dark sunglasses who, frankly, looks like half the corporate executives in 1970s America.
Literally any guy in a suit.
Right. Plus, we have these enormous topological maps detailing hundreds of miles of rugged Pacific Northwest wilderness. But then, sitting right next to all that aging paper, is a highly technical recent electron microscope analysis report of a simple black clip-on necktie.
Which perfectly encapsulates the 50-year evolution of this investigation, I think. I mean, we started with sheriffs on horseback combing the woods and ended with particle physicists examining atomic-level dust.
It's wild. So our entire mission today is to tear down the pop culture myth and dissect the raw, unadorned facts for you.
We need to look past the legend.
Definitely. We are going to explore the incredibly bizarre contrast between Cooper's meticulous, brilliant on-the-ground planning and his seemingly suicidal, amateurish escape.
The great paradox of the case.
Yeah. We're going to unravel the baffling physical evidence left behind, including a highly controversial discovery on a muddy river beach almost a decade later. And we'll analyze exactly why the FBI, after 50 years of chasing ghosts, had to officially close this case with zero definitive answers.
I mean, to understand the sheer scale of the NORJAK file, you have to realize that this was a masterclass in how a single event can be simultaneously perfectly executed and, disastrously botched.
And wait until we get to the accidental bureaucratic bungle involving a dummy parachute or the comic book connection that points across the border. But let's start at the beginning. Imagine stepping into Portland International Airport on the afternoon of November 24th, 1971.
Right, the day before Thanksgiving. The busiest travel day of the year.
Exactly. And the atmosphere is completely different from the airports you and I know today. There are no TSA checkpoints, no metal detectors, no ID verifications whatsoever.
It was a completely different era of aviation.
It really was. A middle-aged man walks right up to the Northwest Airlines counter carrying a dark briefcase. He purchases a one-way ticket to Seattle, Washington.
And he pays with cash.
Yep, pays with a $20 bill and gives the name Dan Cooper.
Just a completely unremarkable transaction.
Yeah.
He exploited the profound vulnerability of 1970s aviation. Anyone could walk off the street, give a fake name, hand over cash, and walk onto a commercial airliner carrying virtually anything.
It's terrifying to think about now. So he boards Northwest Airlines Flight 305. It's a Boeing 727. He is one of 37 passengers, along with a crew of 6.
And we really need to establish his physical description here, because this specific profile becomes the foundation for a half-century manhunt.
Right. The crew and passengers describe a white male in his mid-40s, Brown eyes, dark hair, possibly receding slightly.
Very generic features.
Extremely. He's wearing a dark trench coat, a dark business suit, a crisp white shirt, a black clip-on tie, a mother-of-pearl tie tack, and dark slip-on loafers. He looks like any other businessman heading home for the holiday.
The banality of his appearance was his first weapon, really. He wrapped himself in the era's standard corporate uniform.
He didn't look like a threat at all.
Exactly. He didn't look like a hijacker. He looked like a mid-level manager. So he makes his way to the back of the plane and takes a seat in the middle of the last row on the right side of the cabin, seat 18C.
And this is where the cinematic quality of the story really takes over. He sits down, gets comfortable, and because it's 1971, he orders a bourbon and 7UP, and he lights a Raleigh filter-tipped cigarette.
He was just entirely at ease. Once the flight is cleared for departure, the plane takes off for what is supposed to be a short 30-minute hop to Seattle.
Right, just a quick commuter flight.
But shortly after takeoff, Cooper turns around and hands a white envelope to a flight attendant named Florence Schaffner. She was sitting in the jump seat attached to the aft stairwell door directly behind him.
And Schaffner was young, attractive, and completely accustomed to businessmen passing her their phone numbers on these flights. So she initially just drops the envelope unopened into her purse.
She thought he was just hitting on her.
Exactly. But Cooper leans in very calmly and tells her, "Miss, you better look at that note. I have a bomb."
That sentence instantly shifted the atmosphere on Flight 305 from a routine holiday commuter flight to a desperate hostage situation.
I can't even imagine the panic she must have felt. She opens the note. It's handwritten in neat all-capital letters using a felt tip pen.
And it's very direct.
Very. It states clearly that he has a bomb in his briefcase and demands that she sit beside him. She reluctantly moves to the seat next to him.
But obviously she needs proof. Anyone can write a note.
Right. So he opens the briefcase just enough for her to look inside. She reports seeing what appeared to be 8 distinct sticks of dynamite, 2 rows of 4 red cylinders connected by wires to a large cylindrical battery.
So this wasn't just a verbal threat. He provided immediate, terrifying visual confirmation.
Yeah, he made sure she knew he was serious. He then outlines his demands, and they are staggeringly specific.
He demands $200,000 in cash. But he uses a very particular phrase, which is fascinating. He asks for negotiable currency.
Negotiable currency, that's such a specific way to word it.
It is. And alongside the money, he demands 4 parachutes specifically, 2 front reserve parachutes and 2 back primary parachutes.
And he had ground demands too, right?
Yes. Finally, he demands that a fuel truck be standing by on the tarmac to refuel the aircraft the absolute second they land in Seattle.
He makes it crystal clear. If they don't comply, or if there's any funny business, he will, quote, do the job. So Schaffner immediately heads to the cockpit to inform the pilot, Captain William Scott.
And this brings another flight attendant, Tina Mucklow, into the picture. She steps in to remain by Cooper's side.
Right. Mucklow ends up acting as the primary intermediary for the remainder of the hijacking. She uses the cabin telephone in the rear of the plane to communicate with the cockpit.
Establishing a single intermediary is actually a brilliant tactical maneuver on his part. Well, he doesn't stand up. He doesn't wave a gun around. He doesn't shout demands to the entire cabin. He keeps the panic level at absolute 0.
Oh, I see. He compartmentalizes the threat.
Exactly. In fact, most of the passengers on board had absolutely no idea they were being hijacked until they landed in Seattle and were told to deplane. They just thought they were experiencing a minor mechanical delay.
I have to pause here because, as a parent of 2, this psychological profile just completely breaks my brain.
Oh, I'm sure.
I mean, I can barely keep a steady heart rate when my kids are having a full-blown meltdown over the wrong brand of cereal at breakfast. The sheer, unpredictable chaos of managing a household spikes my cortisol.
Right, normal human reactions to stress.
But this man, he is sitting quietly in the back of a metal tube in the sky, sipping a bourbon, casually smoking a cigarette with a live bomb resting on his lap, and calmly dictating terms to federal authorities. I mean, what does that level of profound emotional detachment tell us about who he was?
It points heavily toward extreme stress inoculation. You don't just wake up one morning, put on a suit, and decide to casually hijack a commercial airliner with that level of physiological control.
It's not normal.
Not at all. The flight attendants noted his pulse, metaphorically speaking, never seemed to elevate. He was polite. He even offered to pay for his drink.
Wait, he offered to pay for his bourbon while holding the plane hostage?
He did. He was firm, but he wasn't erratic. This indicates someone who has either been repeatedly exposed to highly volatile, life-or-death situations, perhaps intense military combat, special operations, or high-stakes intelligence work, or someone who possesses a distinct sociopathic trait that severely blunts the normal human fear response. He treated hijacking a plane full of civilians like a tedious but necessary business transaction.
That is chilling. Let's look at the other side of that transaction. The plane is now circling Seattle in a holding pattern for about an hour and a half while authorities scramble.
Which gave them time to get the money and parachutes.
Right. Down on the ground, the FBI and local police are pulling this ransom together. And Seattle First National Bank actually had a ransom package of $250,000 set aside in a vault for exactly this kind of scenario.
Which is a wild detail that really highlights the epidemic of skyjackings in the early 70s. Banks just kept hostage money on hand.
Yeah, it was a regular Tuesday for them. So they pulled together 10,000 $20 bills to meet his $200,000 demand.
The physical logistics of that demand are really important. 10,000 $20 bills weigh roughly 21 pounds.
That's heavy.
It's a substantial, bulky package. But the FBI wasn't just handing over free money. They employed a massive team of agents to rapidly microfilm every single one of those 10,000 bills before putting them in the knapsack.
They recorded every serial number.
Exactly. They were laying a long-term trap, banking on the fact that eventually, if he survived, he would have to spend that cash.
They also have to source the parachutes. They can't just run to an army base because military chutes at the time opened incredibly aggressively and required specific training. They need civilian rigs.
Right, something a novice could potentially use.
So they end up waking up the owner of a local skydiving school in Seattle to secure them. Finally, by 5:45 p.m., more than 2 hours past its scheduled arrival time, Flight 305 lands in Seattle.
And the conditions are terrible. The sun has set. It's late November, it's dark, and it's raining.
The plane taxis to a remote, brightly lit section of the tarmac, completely isolated from the terminal.
This is where Cooper's ground strategy proves he was operating on a completely different level. The plane stops, he orders the cabin lights turned off.
Why turn the lights off?
To prevent police snipers from getting a clear shot through the windows. The cabin is dark, the tarmac is bright. He can see out, but they can't see in.
Brilliant. So Tina Mucklow is sent out the aft stairs to retrieve the heavy knapsack of ransom money and the parachutes. She hauls them all back aboard.
And in exchange, Cooper honors his end of the bargain. He releases all 36 passengers and 2 of the flight attendants.
Only Mucklow, Captain Scott, the first officer, and the flight engineer remain on board. Let's examine the counter-surveillance techniques he utilized during this phase, because looking at the timeline, his actions on the ground are almost frighteningly calculated.
Oh, absolutely. First, consider the handwritten bomb threat he gave to Florence Schaffner. The moment she sat next to him, he asked for the note back.
And she gave it back.
She gave it to him. With that single, quiet request, he entirely eliminated the primary piece of physical evidence that the FBI could have used for forensic handwriting analysis.
Wow.
He erased his signature from the crime scene before the crime was even over.
And what about his physical disguise? Soon after boarding, he puts on a pair of dark, wraparound sunglasses.
Wearing sunglasses indoors on a dimly lit plane, especially after the sun has set, it's very deliberate.
He knew the flight attendants were staring at him. Those glasses obscured his eye shape, the exact set of his brow line, the precise features witnesses would desperately need later to help sketch artists build an accurate composite.
Right. He is controlling the entire narrative, hiding his face in plain sight, and managing the evidence in real time.
But the most genius psychological maneuver, in my opinion, is his demand for 4 parachutes. 2 primaries, 2 reserves. Why 4? He's a lone hijacker.
It's a phenomenal question. If you ask for 1 parachute, the FBI immediately knows you are jumping alone.
Right, and they have every incentive to sabotage the gear then.
Exactly. They could pack it improperly, they could put holes in the canopy, they could give you a rig with a broken ripcord.
But by demanding 4.
By demanding 4 parachutes, he forced the FBI into a terrifying tactical assumption. He might be taking hostages with him on the jump.
Oh, man. Possibly Tina Mucklow or possibly one of the pilots?
Yes. The FBI could not risk handing over sabotaged or faulty equipment because they had absolutely no idea who would be strapping it on. He paralyzed their ability to tamper with his escape gear by weaponizing their duty to protect the hostages.
It's an absolute masterstroke, but the brilliance extends to the aircraft itself. Flight 305 was a Boeing 727-100 series. He didn't just walk into the airport and hijack the first plane he saw.
No, the 727 was uniquely equipped with an aft stairway, a set of passenger stairs that lowers directly from the underbelly right beneath the tail of the fuselage.
For you listening who might not be aviation experts, why is that aft stairway so critical?
The aerodynamics of that specific plane are critical to understanding the escape. Most commercial airliners have side doors. If you try to jump out of a side door of a jet moving at 200 miles an hour, the slipstream, that violent wall of air rushing past the fuselage, will grab you.
And throw you backwards.
It will slam you directly into the horizontal stabilizers or the engines at the rear of the plane. It's essentially a death sentence.
Yeah.
But the 727's aft stairway creates an aerodynamic pocket. It allows a jumper to drop straight down under the tail, completely bypassing that deadly slipstream.
And the history behind that capability is fascinating. The CIA actually heavily utilized the Boeing 727 in Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War.
Yes, their proprietary airline, Air America.
Exactly. Air America used that exact aircraft to execute covert supply drops and insert agents behind enemy lines. Specifically because that aft stairway could be opened mid-flight without depressurizing the cabin in a way that would rip the plane apart.
Which raises a massive flashing red flag about Cooper's true identity.
Right. Was he a former military paratrooper or was he a CIA operative?
I mean, how did a seemingly random, unremarkable man in a mid-level business suit know the highly specific, largely classified aerodynamic capabilities of the 727's ventral stairs?
It's too specific to be a coincidence. He selected an aircraft that provided a pre-engineered, relatively safe means of jumping.
Absolutely. So, while the plane is sitting on the tarmac in Seattle, Cooper is executing a masterclass in hijacking. He is in total, unquestioned control.
But as the plane gets cleared for takeoff again, this meticulous, calculating tactician seems to completely vanish. He is suddenly replaced by a man who seemingly leaves his survival entirely up to chance, amateur mistakes, and the freezing winds of the Pacific Northwest.
It is the great paradox of NORJAK. We have the ground tactician versus the airborne amateur.
Let's follow the timeline into the sky. The plane is refueled, the passengers are gone, the 20 pounds of cash and the 4 parachutes are sitting in the cabin. Cooper tells Tina Mucklow to relay his next set of demands to the cockpit.
He wants to fly to Mexico City.
But he doesn't just give them a destination, right? He dictates highly specific flight parameters that govern exactly how the aircraft must be flown.
Yes, he orders Captain Scott to fly with the landing gear fully deployed, the wing flaps lowered to 15 degrees, and the altitude kept strictly below 10,000 feet.
He also wants the cabin lights remaining off and the aft stairway extended literally open to the elements for takeoff.
The cockpit crew immediately informs them that 2 of those demands are mechanically impossible. First, flying a 727 with the gear down and the flaps extended creates massive aerodynamic drag.
Right, it's like driving down the highway with your car doors wide open.
Exactly. It burns fuel at an astronomical rate. They physically cannot carry enough fuel to make it non-stop to Mexico City in that configuration.
So Cooper calmly compromises. They agree on a flight path that includes a refueling stop in Reno, Nevada.
Second, Captain Scott informs him that it is incredibly unsafe and likely impossible to take off with the aft stairway extended. The ground clearance simply isn't there.
The risk of the stairs striking the runway and sparking a catastrophic fire during rotation is too high, I'd imagine.
Way too high. So Cooper accepts this, agreeing to retract the stairs for takeoff, but on one condition.
And this is where it gets weird. Tina Mucklow has to stay with him in the back of the plane and physically teach him how to manually operate the hydraulic stairs once they are airborne.
Again, picture the terrifying calmness. He's taking a tutorial from a terrified flight attendant on how to open a door on an airplane mid-flight.
But that request reveals a vital gap in his knowledge, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. Despite knowing that the 727 could be jumped from safely, he didn't actually know the precise mechanical procedure for deploying the stairs from the inside.
So he knew the capability, but not the mechanics.
He needed Mucklow's instruction. He wasn't an airline mechanic.
After a lengthy delay on the ground, Flight 305 finally takes off again. It is 7:36 p.m. Less than 5 minutes after wheels up, Cooper turns to Mucklow and dismisses her.
He tells her to go forward to the cockpit, join the rest of the crew, lock the door, and absolutely do not disturb him.
And that moment is the last time any human being ever saw D.B. Cooper. Mucklow noted that as she walked away, glancing back down the long, dark cabin, he was standing in the middle of the aisle.
He was tying something around his waist. He looked like a man preparing for a jump. She walked into the cockpit and locked the heavy door.
For the next half hour, The crew is sitting in the cramped cockpit flying this bizarre, low-altitude, high-drag flight profile directly into the teeth of a Pacific Northwest winter storm.
At approximately 8:05 p.m., the crew gets on the intercom. They offer Cooper assistance, perhaps just testing to see if he's still back there.
And he simply replies, no.
That single syllable is his final communication with the world.
Sometime in the next 10 to 15 minutes, the pilots feel a distinct physical change in the aircraft. What exactly did they feel?
They logged it as an oscillation, a sudden vibration, followed by a distinct shift in the plane's pitch. The nose of the 727 pitched up abruptly.
Why would the nose pitch up?
Well, to understand why, you have to look at the physics of the aircraft. When a plane is flying that slowly, with its gear down, it is struggling to stay airborne. If a 170-pound man walks to the absolute furthest point of the tail and steps off the stairs, you're suddenly removing a significant amount of weight from the rear of the aircraft.
So the center of gravity shifts forward,
Causing the nose to pitch up.
For those of you listening unfamiliar with aviation terms, the pilots had to trim the aircraft to regain level flight. Trimming essentially means the pilots adjusted the small aerodynamic tabs on the tail elevators.
It mechanically locks the plane into that new pitch, so the pilots don't have to physically exhaust themselves wrestling the control yoke for the rest of the flight.
That moment of trimming at roughly 8:13 p.m. was almost certainly the exact second. D.B. Cooper stepped off the stairs and leaped into the void.
And we really need to emphasize the brutal physical reality of that jump. This wasn't a recreational skydive on a sunny afternoon in July.
No, picture yourself standing on those metal stairs. It is pitch black. It is late November. The plane is plowing through a massive freezing rainstorm.
The airspeed is roughly 170 knots. That's almost 200 miles an hour of freezing wind and rain slamming into your face the moment you step out of the cabin.
The wind rushing under the fuselage was so violently strong that it actually ripped a solid metal placard completely off the air stairs. That placard was found by a hunter years later.
Furthermore, he is jumping entirely blind. The cloud cover is incredibly dense, stretching for thousands of feet below him. He cannot see the ground.
He has absolutely no idea what terrain he is plummeting toward. It could be jagged mountains, dense alpine forests, freezing lakes, or suburban towns. He is jumping into an abyss.
And we must talk about what he was wearing. We established he was wearing a standard business suit.
Right. He wore a trench coat, a suit jacket, and slip-on loafers into a freezing, high-altitude rainstorm.
Slip-on loafers. He didn't ask for a helmet. He didn't ask for heavy boots. He didn't ask for thermal undergarments. He was dressed for a corporate board meeting, not a wilderness survival drop.
Which brings us to the most agonizing element of the entire case. The parachute paradox. When the FBI sourced the 4 parachutes from the skydiving school, they didn't get 4 identical rigs.
No, they didn't. For the primary parachutes, the main canopy you wear on your back, they provided one high-end, modern, steerable civilian sport parachute made by Pioneer, and one much older, technically inferior, non-steerable military rig called an NB6.
This is what drives investigators completely crazy. He leaves the good one behind. He leaves the modern, highly maneuverable civilian luxury chute sitting in the cabin.
And he chooses to strap on the older, non-steerable NB6 military chute.
Meaning, the second he leaves that plane, he's completely at the mercy of the wind currents. He cannot steer his descent to avoid trees. He cannot aim for a clearing. He cannot coordinate a precision landing to meet an accomplice waiting on a dirt road.
But the paradox deepens when you look at the reserve parachutes, the smaller backup chutes worn on the chest. In their frantic, desperate rush to gather the equipment in Seattle, the FBI and the skydiving instructor made a catastrophic error.
They accidentally handed over a dummy reserve parachute. How does that even happen?
A dummy chute is used exclusively for classroom demonstrations. It looks like a real parachute on the outside, but inside, there is no silk canopy. It is non-functional.
So what's inside it?
It is literally just a canvas pack stuffed with heavy foam padding to simulate the weight. The instructor grabbed it by mistake in the dark. And Cooper, the supposed criminal mastermind who planned this flawless hijacking, seemingly doesn't notice.
Because when the FBI finally searched the empty plane in Reno, that dummy chute was gone. He took a backpack full of foam into a 10,000-foot freefall.
It's astounding.
I am looking at this entire sequence, and the logic completely falls apart for me. This feels like a master thief planning a high-tech bank heist down to the absolute millisecond, perfectly bypassing the laser grid, flawlessly cracking the vault combination. Wait, let me use a better comparison. It's like doing all that and then trying to make your getaway down the highway on a unicycle.
The unicycle getaway, I like that.
It makes zero sense. Why would a meticulous mastermind choose the worst possible primary gear, fail to conduct a basic safety check on his reserve, and jump entirely blind into a freezing storm in a pair of loafers? Was he just an arrogant amateur who got incredibly lucky while he was sitting comfortably in the cabin?
That is the dividing line for every single Cooper investigator. But let me offer a completely different framework for his actions, because amateur might be entirely the wrong word.
I'm listening.
Let's start with the primary parachute. Yes, he chose the older, unsteerable NB-6 over the modern civilian Pioneer chute. But in the world of high-stakes aviation, choosing the older tech doesn't necessarily indicate ignorance. It often indicates deep, ingrained familiarity.
Familiarity, like he's used it before.
Yes. If Cooper was a former military paratrooper from the 1950s or 60s, he would have been extensively trained on that exact style of round, non-steerable military canopy. When you are standing on the edge of a plane in pitch darkness, preparing for the most dangerous physical act of your life, you do not want to experiment with a fancy piece of civilian equipment you've never worn before.
You revert to your training.
You trust muscle memory. You use what you know will open.
Okay, muscle memory over modern convenience. I can buy that. But how do you explain the dummy reserve parachute? He jumped out of an airplane with a backpack full of upholstery foam.
Well, did he rely on it as a parachute? Or did he repurpose it as a tool?
Think about the pure physical logistics of his jump. He has a bulky briefcase containing a bomb, and he has a canvas bank knapsack filled with 21 pounds of cash.
Right.
How do you jump out of a commercial jet holding all of that? You absolutely cannot hold it in your hands. The 200-mile-an-hour slipstream will rip it from your grip, instantly snapping your wrists. You have to physically anchor the payload to your body. He needed a harness.
Exactly. When FBI forensics teams examined the functional reserve parachute that Cooper left behind on the plane, they found that he had actually opened it. He had unraveled the canopy and used his pocket knife to cut several of the strong nylon suspension lines away from the silk.
Why would he do that?
It's highly probable he used those nylon cords to tie the heavy money knapsack directly to his torso. So consider the dummy chute. What if he didn't grab the dummy chute thinking it was a life-saving backup? What if he realized exactly what it was and grabbed it specifically because he needed the heavy canvas straps, the metal D-rings, and the sturdy harness to securely strap the bomb or the money to his chest?
So he was cannibalizing the gear in the dark.
He was MacGyvering it. He didn't care that the dummy chute wouldn't open because he was never planning to pull the ripcord on it. He used it purely as a heavy-duty cargo harness.
Wow, see, that completely obliterates the unicycle analogy. Suddenly he's a tactical improviser, adapting his equipment on the fly in a dark, shaking cabin.
It changes the whole perspective on his competence.
It really does. But regardless of his preparation, the outcome remains the same. At roughly 8:13 p.m., somewhere over the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest, D.B. Cooper stepped into the void and disconnected from the world.
And 3 agonizing hours later, Captain Scott lands the 727 safely in Reno, Nevada.
Surrounded by armed FBI agents, the crew cautiously opens the reinforced cockpit door, steps into the cabin, and finds it completely empty. The hijacker is gone. The bomb is gone. The knapsack of cash is gone.
Leaving the authorities with a terrified flight crew, a severely damaged set of aft stairs dragging on the runway, and absolutely zero idea where the man actually landed.
The FBI immediately launches an unprecedented manhunt. They mobilize everything they have, but the conditions they are facing are a logistical nightmare.
They're looking for a needle in a haystack, except the haystack is hundreds of square miles of some of the most rugged, impenetrable, mountainous wilderness in North America, completely obscured by a dense canopy of towering pine trees.
Where do they even start?
They start by analyzing the flight path. Captain Scott was flying along a standard commercial airway known as Victor 23. It's important to note that Cooper never demanded this specific route. It was just the standard airway to Reno.
Using the timing of the aircraft's oscillation, the FBI estimates a primary drop zone roughly 40 kilometers north of Portland, Oregon, near the town of Ariel, Washington, surrounding the Lewis River.
By the next morning, it is a full-scale military operation. They have Air Force fighter jets running reconnaissance, Army helicopters flying grid patterns, hundreds of ground troops, local sheriffs on horseback, and FBI agents combing the woods.
They even utilized an SR-71 Blackbird spy plane to photograph the entire flight path.
but they are battling freezing temperatures and torrential rain that persists for days. The rain is rapidly washing away any potential trace evidence.
And the terrain itself is brutal. The forest canopy is so thick and the underbrush so dense that searchers noted you could be standing 50 feet away from a massive white parachute canopy tangled in the brush and you would never see it.
And despite this massive multi-agency mobilization, not a single trace of Cooper is found in those crucial first weeks. They found no parachute silk. They found no discarded briefcase.
They found no waterlogged trench coat. And they certainly didn't find a body.
What they did find, however, was an overwhelming media circus. And this is the perfect moment to discuss how the name D.B. Cooper actually entered the cultural lexicon.
Right, because remember, the name on his flight ticket was Dan Cooper.
It is arguably the greatest accidental rebranding moment in criminal history. In the chaotic immediate aftermath of the hijacking, the FBI in Portland begins frantically checking out any local suspects with similar names.
Which is standard procedure.
Sure. One of the individuals they briefly bring in for questioning is a local Oregon man with a minor police record whose name happened to be D.B. Cooper. The FBI interviews him and clears him almost instantly. He had a rock-solid alibi and had absolutely nothing to do with it.
But a zealous local reporter catches wind that the FBI is interrogating a man named D.B. Cooper.
Yes, and in the desperate rush to get the scoop to the wire services, the reporter conflates the innocent suspect's name with the hijacker's alias, Dan Cooper.
The headline hits the presses reading, D.B. Cooper, and it just permanently sticks. It sounds harder, it sounds cooler, it sounds like an outlaw from a pulp novel.
It completely changed how the public viewed him.
As a journalist, the sociological impact of this mistake fascinates me. A simple wire service typo accidentally created an American folk hero. It instantly shifted the public's perception of him from a terrifying domestic terrorist who threatened to blow up a plane full of innocent civilians to a suave, mysterious anti-hero who beat the system.
And we cannot overstate how deeply that media mythologizing crippled the actual FBI investigation. When the public begins to view a violent suspect as a Robin Hood figure, the investigative tip line gets flooded with absolute garbage.
People start projecting their own romanticized narratives onto the case.
It perfectly demonstrates the incredible fragility of early information in high-profile events. The FBI literally spent years chasing down hundreds of dead-end leads from people who claimed they knew a guy who kind of looked like D.B. Cooper, entirely fueled by the sensationalism of the press.
Speaking of the original name, let's dig into the alias Dan Cooper. Where did he pull that name from? Was it just a random generic John Doe pseudonym?
Well, there is a highly compelling linguistic and cultural theory that points the investigation directly across the northern border, the French-Canadian comic book theory.
This remains one of the most intriguing pieces of circumstantial evidence regarding the hijacker's origins. In 1971, there was a very popular, long-running comic book series published primarily in French.
And the star of the comic was a heroic Royal Canadian Air Force test pilot who went on daring high-altitude adventures, often involving experimental aircraft and parachuting behind enemy lines.
And the character's name was Dan Cooper.
Exactly, Dan Cooper.
Now, here's the crucial geographical detail for you. This specific comic book was not translated into English in 1971. It was not distributed or sold on newsstands in the United States.
It was exclusively available in Europe and in Canada, particularly in the Francophone regions of Quebec.
So, if the hijacker deliberately chose the alias Dan Cooper as an inside joke or an homage to a fictional parachuting pilot, it strongly suggests he had a distinct connection to Canada. He could have been a bilingual Canadian citizen or an American who spent significant time working across the border.
This theory aligns surprisingly well with the witness testimonies regarding his voice. The flight crew spent hours talking to him. They noted that he was very polite, very well-spoken, but crucially, he had absolutely no discernible regional accent.
He didn't sound like a Southerner. He didn't have a rapid-fire New York cadence. He didn't have a Midwest drawl.
He spoke with a flat, completely neutral accent, which perfectly fits the linguistic profile of a bilingual Canadian or someone native to the Pacific Northwest.
We can connect this linguistic analysis back to his exact phrasing during the initial hijacking demands. When Captain Scott radioed Cooper's demands down to air traffic control, Scott used a highly specific phrase. He relayed, he wants negotiable American currency.
American currency. Think about the semantics of that. If you are a U.S. citizen robbing a bank in Chicago or hijacking a plane over Seattle,
Right.
you do not ask for American currency.
You ask for cash. You ask for dollars.
Right. Explicitly specifying the nationality of the currency strongly implies that you are a foreign national who operates in multiple currencies.
However, as with every single clue in the Norjack file, there is a massive muddy puddle right next to it. The original frantic handwritten notes taken by the flight attendants in the cabin merely say negotiable currency.
The critical word American is completely absent from their notes.
So we are left agonizing over a massive variable. Did Cooper actually say American currency, revealing his foreign origins? Or did Captain Scott, while rapidly paraphrasing under extreme life-threatening stress over the radio, intuitively add the word American just to ensure the FBI didn't bring up bags of Canadian dollars or Mexican pesos?
It is a tantalizing, unconfirmed clue that could blow the case wide open or mean absolutely nothing.
Which serves as a perfect summary for the entire first decade of the Norjack investigation, a relentless parade of tantalizing clues that evaporate upon closer inspection. A massive military search that uncovers nothing.
For 9 long years, the Pacific Northwest wilderness kept its secrets. The trail went absolutely ice cold.
But then the timeline jumps to early 1980. The Earth finally gave something back. But instead of providing closure, this discovery completely fractured the geographic timeline and made the case infinitely more confusing.
It was the breakthrough the FBI had been praying for, and it instantly became their biggest headache.
It's February 1980. A young 8-year-old boy named Brian Ingram is on a weekend camping trip with his family. They are on a small, sandy recreational beach called Tina Bar, located on the northern banks of the Columbia River in southern Washington state.
Brian is using his hands and a small piece of wood to dig a shallow pit in the sand to build a campfire.
A few inches down, he hits something solid. He pulls out 3 severely decayed, rotting, compacted bundles of cash. The bills are brittle, but the denomination is clear. $20 bills. It totals exactly $5,880.
His parents, well aware of the local legend, immediately contact the local authorities who turn it over to the FBI.
The FBI forensic accountants pull out their massive microfilm master list of the 10,000 serial numbers. They cross-reference the rotted bills. It is a flawless 100% match. It is the Cooper ransom money.
After 9 years of chasing shadows, they finally possess physical evidence from the jump.
But here's where the geography lesson completely ruins the celebration. How on earth did the money get to Tina Bar? If you look at a topographical map of the region, the initial simplest theory seems plausible.
Right, Cooper jumps, the violent wind rips one of the money knapsacks from his grasp. It falls into the Lewis River near the presumed drop zone in Ariel.
The river's current carries it downstream, and it eventually washes up on the sandy beach at Tina Bar.
The massive, glaring problem with that theory is the fundamental laws of physics and hydrology. The Columbia River, where Tina Bar is located, flows in the exact opposite direction of the Lewis River's confluence point.
Water does not flow upstream against a massive river current.
The money physically could not have naturally floated from the Ariel drop zone to that specific beach.
So hydrologists and investigators scramble to draw new maps. They propose the Washougal River theory. They hypothesize that if the aircraft's actual drop zone was much further southeast than they originally calculated, it's theoretically conceivable, though a massive stretch, that the money fell into the Washougal River basin, floated down into the Columbia, and eventually washed ashore at Tina Bar.
But even if we generously accept the Washougal flight path theory, natural environmental explanations completely fail to account for the physical state and grouping of the money.
What do you mean by grouping?
Think about the violent mechanics of a river system carrying debris for miles. It smashes objects against jagged rocks, it tangles them in dense root systems, it disperses lightweight material across miles of shoreline. Yet Brian Ingram found 3 distinct, independent bundles of cash.
And they were found buried in the exact same spot, mere inches apart.
What are the statistical odds that 3 separate lightweight bundles of paper, free-floated down a raging river system for years, arrived at the exact same square foot of beach simultaneously, and naturally buried themselves neatly under the sand?
It entirely defies logic. And the timeline gets even more convoluted when we introduce the Army Corps of Engineers and the 1974 dredging operation.
The dredging.
In 1974, to deepen the shipping channels, the Army Corps dredged the bottom of the Columbia River. They took tons of sandy riverbed sediment and sprayed it directly onto the shores of Tina Bar.
Initially, geological analysts looked at the stratigraphy, the distinct layers of dirt and sediment, and confidently stated that the money was buried in a layer above this 1974 dredged sediment.
If that were true, the implications would be earth-shattering. It would definitively prove that the money was placed on that beach after 1974.
It would mean Cooper survived the freezing jump, walked out of the woods, and came back years later to bury the cash.
But of course, the muddy waters of Norjack return. A much later, vastly more thorough re-examination of the geology and the diatoms, the microscopic algae in the soil, showed that the money was actually found deeply embedded in a natural pre-existing layer of clay, not the 1974 dredged sand.
Furthermore, historical dredging records show that the sediment was actually dumped a fair distance away from the exact stretch of beach where Brian Ingram dug his fire pit.
So the dredging timeline theory collapses. But the absolute definitive nail in the coffin for the natural floating theory comes from a brilliant piece of scientific detective work conducted decades later in 2009.
The lead investigator of a citizen sleuth group, Tom Kay, conducted the rubber band experiment.
This is one of my favorite parts of the entire investigation. When Brian Ingram found the bundles in 1980, the rubber bands holding the $20 bills together were severely degraded, brittle, and crumbling, but they were still structurally intact.
They were still wrapped completely around the bundles of money.
So Tom Kay and his team of scientists sourced that exact specific brand and chemical composition of 1970s rubber bands. They designed an experiment, they exposed them to open air, they submerged them in Columbia River water, they subjected them to freezing temperatures and UV light.
And the chemical results were conclusive. Due to the rapid polymerization and breakdown of the rubber, those specific bands completely lose their elasticity and snap under the pressure of the money after just one single year of exposure to the elements.
1 year.
1 year. Imagine you are an FBI agent staring at this logic puzzle on your desk. If those rubber bands chemically disintegrate in a single year, those bundles absolutely could not have been floating down a violent river for 9 years. They had to be shielded, protected from the elements, almost immediately after the hijacking in November 1971.
They had to be buried in that clay within months, if not weeks. Natural environmental explanations completely struggle to explain how 3 bundles stayed perfectly wrapped, floated upstream, and buried themselves in a neat little pile.
Which leaves us with the only logical yet completely maddening conclusion: human intervention. A human being purposefully buried that specific stack of money at Tina Bar.
But who and why?
That is the profound mystery within the mystery. Did Dan Cooper miraculously survive the jump, trek out of the freezing wilderness, and bury a tiny fraction of his loot, less than $6,000 out of $200,000, as a hidden cache to retrieve later?
Or did he die a brutal death upon impact in the forest, and years later a hiker, a logger, or a hunter stumbled upon his decaying remains? Did they steal the main knapsack of money and bury a few bundles on the beach, either to hide them from their spouse or to deliberately throw the FBI off the scent?
Both of those scenarios sound like the plot of a Hollywood thriller. But human intervention is the only scientific theory that accounts for the degrading rubber bands and the clustered grouping.
And this leads us to the ultimate investigative question. If a human being buried that money, who was it? Who was the man hiding behind the wraparound sunglasses?
To answer that, we have to look at the microscopic evidence, which transitions us to the lineup of ghosts. For decades, the FBI desperately tried to attach a name and a face to Dan Cooper, relying heavily on physical evidence that was rapidly degrading, or, in one tragic instance, vanishing altogether.
And we really have to address what is arguably the most heartbreaking loss of trace evidence in the history of the FBI.
It's unbelievable.
When the forensics team processed the empty cabin of Flight 305 back in Reno, they meticulously collected 8 Raleigh cigarette butts from the ashtray located at seat 18C. Remember, he was chain-smoking throughout the hijacking.
8 cigarette butts, saturated in the hijacker's saliva. In 1971, forensic DNA profiling simply did not exist. Blood typing was the best they could do.
So the FBI bagged the cigarettes, logged them as trace evidence, and stored them in the vault in Washington, D.C., assuming they were of limited use.
But by the late 90s and early 2000s, when PCR DNA analysis became a standard, highly accurate forensic tool, agents went down to the vault to retrieve those cigarette butts to extract a genetic profile. And the bag was gone.
Lost.
Yeah.
Destroyed during an office move. Misplaced in a mislabeled box. We still don't know. The single greatest biological goldmine for the hijacker's identity completely vanished into the bureaucratic ether.
It is an absolute investigative tragedy. Without the saliva from the cigarettes, the only biological evidence remaining from the hijacker was the black JCPenney clip-on tie he unclipped and left on his seat before jumping.
The FBI eventually managed to extract a very small partial DNA profile from the metal tie clasp. But there is a massive glaring forensic problem with utilizing that DNA.
Right, because it's a clip-on tie.
Yeah.
Think about the life cycle of a cheap department store tie. A guy buys it off a rack, he wears it to bars, he touches it with unwashed hands, he drops it on diners' tables.
He shakes hands and adjusts the clasp.
Exactly. We have absolutely no way of confirming if the DNA on that clasp belongs to D.B. Cooper, the factory worker who assembled the tie, the cashier who sold it to him, or a completely unrelated suspect who wore it previously. It is highly unreliable for definitively confirming or excluding a suspect in a court of law.
However, while the biological evidence on the tie was compromised, the metallurgical evidence was revolutionary. In 2008, the FBI allowed citizen scientists to take Cooper's tie and place it under a highly advanced scanning electron microscope.
And what they discovered embedded deep within the woven fabric of the tie were incredibly rare, microscopic metallic dust particles.
Specifically, they found unalloyed particles of pure titanium alongside trace elements of bismuth, antimony, and cerium. Now, context is everything. In 2026, titanium alloys are everywhere. It's in our smartphones, our golf clubs, our medical implants.
But in 1971, pure, unalloyed titanium was extremely rare and highly restricted. It was utilized almost exclusively in cutting-edge aerospace manufacturing, like the Boeing Supersonic Transport Project, chemical processing facilities, advanced metallurgical plants, or specialized high-end rail yards.
This metallurgical profile completely shifts the FBI's understanding of the suspect. He wasn't just a random ex-con or a desperate street thug. He was likely a manager, a specialized engineer, or a contractor who spent his days walking the floor of a highly specialized industrial facility.
He wore his cheap suit and clip-on tie to work, and the microscopic atomic-level dust from the factory floor settled invisibly onto his collar.
With that incredible, highly specific scientific clue in mind, let's walk through the primary suspect lineup. These are the men that the FBI and relentless amateur sleuths have chased for 50 years.
The most prominent name in the public consciousness is Robert Rackstraw. He became a primary FBI suspect in the late 1970s. On paper, his military resume reads like a custom-built profile for this exact crime.
Right. He was a highly decorated, highly trained Army paratrooper. He was a daring helicopter pilot who flew combat missions in Vietnam. He was a trained explosives expert.
He also possessed an extensive violent criminal record involving grand theft, bank fraud, and faking his own death.
And crucially, he had a massive burning motive. Shortly before the hijacking, he had just been dishonorably discharged from the military for lying about his education records and his rank. He was furious. He had a massive grudge against the establishment.
And remember, when flight attendant Tina Mucklow asked Cooper why he was targeting Northwest Airlines, Cooper calmly replied, "I don't have a grudge against your airline. I just have a grudge."
Furthermore, Rackstraw was a narcissist who absolutely loved the media spotlight. When investigative reporters asked him point blank on camera if he was D.B. Cooper, he refused to outright deny it.
He'd smirk, wink at the camera, and say coy things like, "I could have been," or "I wouldn't discount myself." He fed the myth.
But I look at the FBI's focus on Rackstraw, and I am genuinely baffled. I am looking at a photograph of Rackstraw from 1971, and he is 28 years old.
That's way too young.
Right. The flight attendants sat mere inches from Cooper in a brightly lit cabin for hours. They were trained to observe passengers. They swore up and down that Cooper was in his mid-40s with signs of aging. Why on earth did the FBI waste so much time and resources on a guy who is clearly almost 2 decades too young? It makes no sense.
And Rackstraw had light-colored eyes. Every single witness agreed Cooper had dark brown eyes.
It's just confirmation bias.
You're completely right. The age discrepancy is massive. The FBI pursued him because they were desperate, and Rackstraw possessed the highly specific paratrooper skill set that so few criminals had. But the physical mismatch ultimately forced the FBI to officially clear him in 1979, despite amateur sleuths obsessing over him for decades.
Okay, let's look at the next major suspect, Kenneth Christensen. He surfaced heavily in the early 2000s. He was a former paratrooper who served in World War II.
But the most compelling, terrifying detail about Christensen is his employment history. He actually worked for Northwest Airlines, the exact airline that was hijacked, as a mechanic, a purser, and a flight attendant.
He knew the interior of the Boeing 727, the crew procedures, and the flight routes inside and out.
He also uniquely matches a very bizarre behavioral quirk observed by the crew. Cooper was repeatedly observed using his left hand to manipulate the latches on the bomb briefcase, and his tie clasp was applied from the left side, strongly suggesting he was left-handed.
Kenneth Christensen was left-handed.
And the psychological climax of his story is his deathbed confession. Shortly before he died of cancer, he pulled his brother close and said, "There is something you should know, but I cannot tell you."
Wow.
After he passed away, his family was shocked to find over $200,000 hidden in his various bank accounts.
And when a documentary crew showed Florence Schaffner, the flight attendant who received the initial bomb note, a photograph of Christensen, she stated that the facial resemblance was strikingly similar to the man she sat next to.
The forensic pushback against Christensen, however, is primarily based on physical stature. Christensen was only 5'8" and very slight of build. The flight crew consistently estimated Cooper was closer to 6 feet tall and broad-shouldered.
Schaffner herself noted that while Christensen's face was similar, Cooper had significantly more hair and a different complexion.
And the massive sum of money in his bank accounts. Forensic accountants traced it. He earned it legitimately over decades by quietly buying and selling local real estate. It wasn't the serialized ransom money.
Then there is the fascinating case of Richard McCoy. This is often referred to as the copycat theory. A mere 5 months after D.B. Cooper vanished, Richard McCoy hijacked a United Airlines Boeing 727 over Colorado.
He demanded $500,000 in cash and 4 parachutes. He provided the crew with detailed handwritten notes, and he escaped by jumping out of the exact same aft stairway.
He even barked the exact same phrase at the crew that Cooper used. No funny stuff.
The operational similarities are virtually identical. McCoy was a decorated Vietnam veteran, a Green Beret demolition expert, and a helicopter pilot. He successfully jumped, he survived the landing, but he made careless mistakes and was apprehended by the FBI just 2 days later, eventually receiving a 45-year prison sentence.
But when you look closely at the granular details of McCoy's jump, the mastermind comparison to Cooper falls apart completely. McCoy was a highly trained, avid recreational skydiver. When he hijacked his plane, he didn't show up in a cheap business suit and slip-on loafers.
He came fully professionally prepared. He brought a professional skydiving jumpsuit, a heavy helmet, and specialized gear.
Exactly. He wasn't an improviser. He was equipped for a tactical skydive. Furthermore, McCoy's psychological profile was completely different. He was extremely demanding, visibly nervous, and erratic during his hijacking, standing in stark contrast to Cooper's chilling, bourbon-sipping calmness.
He was also only 29 years old,
Right.
but the absolute undeniable deal breaker. The FBI brought Richard McCoy in, put him in a physical lineup, and brought in the flight attendants from Flight 305.
And what did they say?
They looked at him and unequivocally swore to the agents that he was not the man they sat next to. McCoy was almost certainly just an arrogant guy who read the detailed newspaper accounts of Cooper's exploit and thought, I have the training to do that better.
Okay, let's examine Dwayne Weber. This narrative contains some deeply chilling psychological elements. He became a primary suspect in 1995. Weber was a World War II veteran who had served time in several prisons, giving him an extensive criminal record.
Visually, he bore a striking resemblance to the FBI composite sketch, and he was 47 years old in 1971, the absolute perfect age, according to the crew.
The Weber theory is entirely built on a deathbed confession. As he lay dying, he flat out told his wife, "I've got a secret to tell you. I am Dan Cooper."
His wife had never heard the name Dan Cooper, as the media always used D.B. Cooper. After he died, his widow started putting together disturbing pieces of his past.
She remembered he had a severe lingering knee injury that he casually claimed he got from jumping out of a plane. She searched his possessions and found an old, heavy canvas bank bag that perfectly matched the exact dimensions of the knapsack used for the ransom.
And the detail that genuinely gives me goosebumps. She recalled that for years, he would frequently wake up in the middle of the night screaming from terrible nightmares, heavily sweating and shouting about leaving his fingerprints on the aft stairs of an airplane.
She also pulled out old vacation photos and realized that in 1979, exactly 1 year before, young Brian Ingram found the decaying money Weber had taken her on a bizarre, unexplained, and very tense walking vacation to that exact remote stretch of the Columbia River near Tina Bar.
As a circumstantial narrative, it is phenomenally compelling. It reads like a perfect true crime novel, but hard forensic science completely ruins the story.
The FBI exhumed Weber's records and pulled his fingerprints. They compared them to the dozens of unknown prints lifted from the cabin of Flight 305. They were not a match.
They pulled a DNA sample from his relatives and compared it to the partial profile on the JCPenney tie clasp. It was not a match. Now, as we've established, those prints and that DNA might belong to an innocent factory worker or a previous passenger, but without a definitive scientific link, Dwayne Weber remains just a highly compelling, haunting story.
Which brings us to our final major suspect, and perhaps the individual who aligns most perfectly with the modern microscopic evidence we discussed earlier, William Smith.
He was proposed as a suspect relatively recently, in 2018, by a team of data analysts. Smith was a World War II Navy veteran. He was 43 years old at the time of the hijacking. He had dark brown eyes.
He matched the physical description flawlessly, especially when compared to a speculative FBI sketch of what an older, slightly heavier Cooper would look like.
But it's his motive and his daily occupation that make William Smith an incredibly fascinating candidate. Smith worked his entire adult life as a yardmaster for a major railroad company.
A rail yard. The exact kind of heavy, industrial, specialized environment where pure, unalloyed titanium particles and rare earth metals would be violently grinding in the air and settling invisibly onto a man's necktie.
Precisely. And the timeline of his grievance is staggering.
Yeah.
In 1970, just 1 year before the hijacking, the Penn Central Transportation Company filed for bankruptcy. At the time, it was the largest corporate bankruptcy in the history of the United States.
Smith lost his job and his entire pension. He had a massive, life-altering, financially devastating grievance against the corporate transportation industry. He had the perfect motive. He had the industrial tie dust.
The overarching theory regarding Smith is brilliant. It suggests he utilized his intricate encyclopedic knowledge of the Pacific Northwest rail networks to plan the escape. He hijacked the plane, timed his jump to land near a specific remote freight rail line, hiked out of the woods, hopped a moving midnight freight train, and rode quietly out of the Pacific Northwest, completely undetected by the massive FBI dragnet.
It is an elegant, highly logical theory that explains how a man could vanish from a heavily militarized search grid. But the investigative pushback is entirely geographical. William Smith lived his entire life in New Jersey on the East Coast.
The hijacker on Flight 305 seemed to possess a distinct casual familiarity with the Pacific Northwest, looking out the window and casually mentioning the proximity of McChord Air Force Base to the Seattle-Tacoma Airport.
Right. Would a bitter East Coast rail worker know the geography of Washington state well enough to successfully plan a blind night jump into a freezing storm?
It's a huge stretch.
Looking at this entire lineup of suspects as an investigative journalist, it is utterly maddening. You have 5 different men who look absolutely nothing alike. One is 28, one is 47, one is short, one is tall, one is a decorated pilot, one is a rail worker.
And yet, utilizing the exact same fragmented pool of evidence, you can weave a highly compelling, deeply persuasive circumstantial narrative for every single one of them.
It demonstrates exactly how dangerous confirmation bias can be. When you are staring at a cold case with missing biological evidence and you are desperate for psychological closure, your brain will instinctively force the puzzle pieces to fit, even if you have to smash them together with a hammer.
And that institutional exhaustion, that crushing realization that the physical evidence was hopelessly degraded, lost in the mail, or scientifically inconclusive, is exactly why the FBI ultimately had to make a very painful, highly publicized decision. In July 2016, after 45 years of relentlessly chasing leads, the FBI officially permanently closed the Norjack case.
They stopped actively investigating the only unsolved skyjacking in commercial aviation history.
They had to. Without those 8 cigarette butts to provide a definitive, undeniable DNA profile, without the discovery of the remaining $194,000 in missing ransom money, and with every viable suspect and original witness rapidly aging and passing away, there was simply no logical investigative path forward.
The Bureau's resources are finite. They made the administrative decision to prioritize active, modern terror threats over chasing a historical ghost. At that moment, D.B. Cooper transitioned permanently from an active criminal pursuit into an American mythological curiosity.
And what a deeply strange, enduring legacy it is. We're going to wrap up this briefing, but I want to synthesize the sheer contradictory scope of what we've unpacked today.
Yeah, D.B. Cooper exists in the ultimate historical gray area. He is a Schrodinger's hijacker. Depending entirely on which specific piece of evidence you choose to focus on, he is either a brilliant, tactical criminal mastermind who pulled off the greatest vanishing act in American history, outsmarting the FBI, the military, and the airlines. Or he is a foolish, desperate, overconfident amateur who jumped in a pair of loafers into a freezing storm and died a brutal death upon impact, quietly swallowed by the vastness of the wilderness.
Both of those realities are equally supported by the exact same NORJAK file. The objective truth remains permanently locked behind lost cigarette butts in a forgotten vault, degrading rubber bands on a muddy riverbank, and the conflicting, fading memories of the shape of a man's face hidden behind dark sunglasses.
But before we sign off, I want you to consider one final lingering thought. A provocation based entirely on the mechanical facts we've explored today. Think about the agonizing irony of the FBI accidentally handing over that dummy parachute. We debated how Cooper might have cleverly used it as a harness to tie the money to his body.
Right, the MacGyver theory.
But what if he didn't? What if, despite his chilling calmness in the cabin and his brilliant counter-surveillance tactics on the tarmac, he really was just an overconfident amateur who didn't know how to chuck his gear?
Oh, that's a dark thought.
Picture the terrifying reality of that final moment. It's pitch black. The wind is screaming past the fuselage at 170 knots. The plane is vibrating violently. He is freezing, his adrenaline is surging, and he is rushing to get out the door before the pilots do something drastic. He straps on his unsteerable primary military chute, and then he reaches for his reserve, the absolute last line of defense between life and a horrifying death. He grabs the heavy canvas pack, buckles it securely to his chest, and steps off the stairs into the abyss.
And then he pulls the primary.
Exactly. He falls into the freezing darkness. He pulls the ripcord on his primary military chute. Maybe the old silk fails. Maybe the violently twisting wind tangles the suspension lines. He is in a dead free fall, plummeting toward the jagged pine trees at terminal velocity. Absolute panic sets in. He reaches desperately for his reserve chute. He grips the metal handle, pulls it hard, bracing himself for the life-saving jolt of a silk canopy opening, and absolutely nothing happens, because all he pulls out of that pack is a handful of useless foam classroom padding.
That is genuinely terrifying.
If that tragic scenario is what actually happened in the dark, then the perfect crime wasn't foiled by brilliant FBI detective work. It wasn't foiled by the harsh elements of the Pacific Northwest. It was foiled by a simple, mundane, bureaucratic clerical error made by a rushed FBI agent and a sleepy skydiving instructor on a rainy tarmac. What if the great mythical D.B. Cooper wasn't a tactical genius who successfully outsmarted the United States government, but simply a man who was swallowed by the earth because of a mistaken inventory, leaving us to chase a phantom for half a century?
It is a terrifying, pathetic, and entirely scientifically plausible end to the legend.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the NORJAK files. Keep looking at the evidence, keep questioning the official narrative, and always remember that sometimes the most complex, enduring mysteries in history are born from the simplest human mistakes. We'll see you on the next investigation.